you've got 8 stones here now marking the spot that 33 years ago Inga was found. It's completely enveloped in silence. The trees act as almost a cloak for her killer or killers to leave her body here. You get the feeling of being so far away from even just the public road. It's a very forbidding, eerie place.
Women fear the violence of men, and many experience it. They have a terror of Badlands, places that are lonely, abandoned, on the margins, places where they sense that harm has been done, where it seems that anguish is trapped. They hear the crack of a boot on branches, sense a shadow in the doorway. They imagine an unheard scream. A violated body dumped without ceremony. If they have to pass that way, they hurry. Dread at their heels. Their fear is a kind of terrorism that somehow manages to thrive in our culture. For most women who are murdered, the predator is a man they know, even a man they love. The setting is often the place that is meant to be the safest. Home. But then there are men who are hunters of women. They groom, they stalk, they snatch, they kill. They know their way around the Badlands. They can map rutted tracks and follow paths so narrow and twisted they are known as rats' tails. And some women become their victims. The Badlands.
Really very chilling to feel this connection with the case in such an intimate way. It's extremely distressing to think that these items have just been in police storage for 33 years and yet they were found with her. It's really only when we get to open up Inga Maria's bag full of items that we can really actually get a true sense of her life. It's really through seeing these items for the first time that you get a complete sense of the case and the real tragedy that happened here. It's a real window into Inga Maria Hauser's life, that teenager, that electrically exciting young woman who had so much to offer and so much to do.
The father of 18-year-old Inga Maria Hauser flew back to Germany yesterday after identifying his daughter's body. detectives investigating what they've termed a particularly brutal murder now want to hear from anyone who thinks they might have seen Inga between Friday the 15th and last Monday, the 18th of April.
Back in 2015, I came across Inga's story. It was life-changing. I have never come across another case like Inga's, because there isn't another case like Inga's. I thought I would try and create a blog. With the chronicles, I'm determined to honor Inga, to return to her a measure of the dignity that was stolen from her, or attempted to be stolen from her in the night that her life was taken.
Ballypatrick Forest is a beautiful place, but there's a chill in it for me. Inga will always be part of that forest, and it would be nice to address that balance. If there was justice for the family, you would have a very different feeling going in there.
The Inga Maria Hauser murder left a lingering, haunting stain in our community that this poor, innocent girl should be found here in this remote clearing in a forest. The case spawned the biggest non-terrorist-related investigation in RUC history. The numbers at the time that were being bandied about were there was about 6,000 people interviewed across the British Isles. It was a whodunit. And where did Inga go, and who was with her, and what really happened to her?
Munich has done more than most European cities to try to break the stranglehold of the motor car.
When I was 3 years old, my family moved to a new apartment building in Einsteinstraße. Around the same time, the family of Inga Maria Hauser also moved in, and we were basically growing up next to each other in the same street, on the same building, on the same floor, just door to door. The Hausers were a pretty regular, middle-class, working-class family. Her dad was a plumber, so he was pretty much around in the neighborhood helping. They were just quite a decent family. And I do have to say that Inga really kind of stood out a little there. I would say she was basically something like the star of the family. She was pretty bright. Even from her appearance, I mean, she had this really light hair, this very open personality and look, and it was easy to connect to her. This is where I lived 33 years ago, and this was Inga's apartment. I can picture the way into her apartment and into her room, and then kind of going back into my room there. I can pretty much see her in front of me, and also going into the backyard, kind of climbing over these roofs of the smaller buildings. We had this one really big party in the backyard with all the people from the house, everybody bringing food and decoration, and that's where Inga did this theater play. All the families of the house came together, and I remember that Inga prepared a theater play. I think she even made up the story and did the decoration. She even painted the backdrops of the stage. I would say she had these two sides. You know, if she was in public or when we were going out with other groups, she was kind of outgoing and extroverted and really fun. And on the other hand, she had this more introverted side, really thinking of things and writing and trying to build her own way of looking to the world.
When I met Inga, she was, I think, 14 years old. I met her at the so-called youth club, a tea lounge at the church in our hood, at St. Gabriel's Church. Obviously, she was a wonderful, beautiful girl. We danced together, we talking everything and nothing. We were free. We were free at this youth club, and that's, for me, the main reason where I go.
It was a chaotic family. Love my sister. But my mother always said, Inga is the smart one, but I deeply loved Inga. Yeah, she was smiling a lot. She was telling me jokes, I was telling jokes back. we both had a good relationship, especially when our parents were not there. Yeah? We had so much fun together. So far as I remember, I've been in my room, no, as she left. We had an argue on the day she left, and I couldn't say goodbye in a good way, no. It's still haunting me, no. I still got nightmares because of this.
My mother was very affected by that, of course, and she never recovered, I think. I didn't really notice it because, you know, I always knew her that way, but I realized that many of the problems we had was kind of caused by that incident with Inga.
When we grew older, you get more interested in what's out there. So I think she was really keen on getting to know other people and other cultures and other countries, and really to widen her horizon.
Inga Maria seems to have been just an incredible young woman. You know, this gorgeous young girl who just was, she's like a young troubadour. You know, she grew up full of dreams and excitement and romance, and couldn't wait to take flight and see the world and, you know, pursue her dreams.
She went to London for a couple of days. Spent some time with friends there, who incidentally warned her that she shouldn't come to Northern Ireland.
In a postcard to her mum and dad, she said, "You probably could not imagine how much I like England. If I could stay, I would preferably stay a year longer. I am totally entranced by London."
She went to, I think, Bath and Liverpool and Preston, and then on a train journey where she slept up to Inverness in Scotland.
Went from Glasgow to Ayr and from there to Stranraer to get over to Ireland. Saw the sea, beautiful and mysterious. Wonder where I stay tonight. Need more money.
The real high point of the trip for Inga was the prospect of coming to Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. That was what she had dreamt of all those nights leading up to her departure from Munich. As she got off the train in Stranraer and stepped on to the Galloway Princess, it was not just a ferry journey to Northern Ireland as she envisaged. It was a journey to the heart of darkness.
As they went off, there was panic among the mourners. Then suddenly scores of them were seen chasing a bearded man who threw more grenades.
Northern Ireland at that time was pretty terrifying. It wasn't long after the Michael Stone incident in West Belfast where he threw grenades at a crowd of mourners at funerals. And indeed the murders of the corporals by the IRA after that.
As some of the crowd attacked the car, one of the soldiers inside pulled out a gun and fired one shot.
In 1988, foreign tourists would have been a very rare thing in Northern Ireland. We were used to anyone who came to these shores from anywhere else was usually a reporter, a war correspondent here to report on what was going on in the streets. It was very rare that anyone would have wanted to holiday in a place that was in the midst of conflict.
The Troubles violence had become very intense. It was one of those darkest before the dawn kind of periods of the Troubles. A young, open-hearted woman arriving over on a ferry, intent upon adventure, would have been something quite unusual.
When Inga arrived in Northern Ireland, she was hungry, she was tired, she just wanted a bed for the night. She did not know where she was going to stay. Inga arrived off the ferry around about 9:30. There was a train due at 10 p.m. She was so close to getting to travel on to the rest of her life. And it is so tantalizing to stand there in Larne ferry terminal and on Larne harbour platform and feel that sense, if only.
The hypothesis that we've ended up with is that Inga was on the boat that came over from Stranraer to Larne. She met a suspect or suspects either on the boat or in the port in Larne, and instead of her taking the journey that she intended to take from Belfast to Dublin, her body was later then found in Ballypatrick Forest.
The information that I was given was that Inga, when she went to exit the foot terminal, that she had forgotten a bag or some of her belongings and had to go back onto the ship. When she went to exit the ship again, the foot terminal had been closed, so she would have had to go out through the vehicle exit. It's possible that she was then offered a lift in that terminal.
She obviously thought that she had met somebody who was going to help her out. She didn't know what lay ahead of her when she climbed into that truck, but he did. It's perfectly clear that whoever took Inga knew what they were doing. She was planning to have a lovely holiday and a lovely trip and a lovely adventure in Northern Ireland. He was planning to kill her.
It was awful. No, that last one, that was a postcard. It came in April. And then the conversation stopped, and then we heard nothing of her. Where is she? No, did she leave with another man? I thought, no, first. What did she do? No.
Myself and a photographer called Jimmy Gaston went out to the scene. And it took us some while to actually find the murder scene. The general feeling was, because it was such a huge forest, a 10,000-acre, 7-mile forest, that someone should have particular knowledge of that forest.
Inga's body was found in a remote area of Ballypatrick Forest near Ballycastle. It's not a location that we would have expected general passers-by or tourists to have been familiar with. Certainly from our perspective, our belief is that the deposition site does demonstrate a degree of local knowledge. We do believe that there is significant relevance to the deposition site being in Ballypatrick Forest.
This was a very difficult location. One would never have found it unless you knew where you were going, and I had to be directed to the scene. I arrived there round about 8 o'clock in the morning, and there was sort of a rather eerie silence in the place. It was rather misty. It was cold. I suppose we're used with going to scenes of sudden and unexpected death, but it certainly was a little bit eerie, I thought. I was struck by the fact that here we were in this lovely forest and so forth, and here we find this body of this beautiful young woman lying on the ground. Knowing the background that she comes to Northern Ireland, backpacking and so forth, looking for a good holiday, and ends up, you know, in this way. So I think it's not just the image of seeing her body, but of knowing, you know, what the circumstances that resulted in her being found in the forest. She was lying face downwards on the ground. She had suffered injuries, and these were mainly confined to her head and neck.
Cause of death, subarachnoid hemorrhage due to traumatic rupture of right vertebral artery due to blows on head and neck.
The key findings were very significant injuries to her neck, and particularly to the back of her neck. There was little doubt that she'd probably been kicked or stamped on the back. Probably her head had been forced backwards. So I think there'd been forcible, what we call hyperextension of her neck. Again, probably with somebody leaning on top of her when she was face downwards on the ground. Pressure on the neck and the damage to the spine had resulted in damage to one of the small arteries, which run up in a little canal within the spine to the brain. And it was that brain hemorrhage that I think was the final event that caused her death.
In a final act of contempt for Inga, they rendered her half naked, left her like an animal carcass in that forest, and strolled off into the night, whistling their way through life as they have ever since.
One of the areas that the police were clearly very interested in is whether this could have been a sexually motivated attack. There had been interference with her clothing. Her leggings had been removed. Certainly from my point of view, the motivation behind the attack was probably sexually motivated. And I think it's very likely that she had been attempting to protect herself, and I think that's probably how a number of the injuries that she got were sustained. I think she had been putting up a fight, a struggle to prevent this occurring.
It was very clear from the autopsy report the level of cruelty and brutality that Inga Maria Hauser suffered. She was left in the forest, partially clothed, and all of her belongings strewn around her. She suffered a painful, slow, and merciless death.
We got a phone call, she's dead. On my mom's birthday, on the 20th of April, we got that phone call. That hit her very hard now on her birthday. Now, have you imagined this? And I didn't believe this. No, she's not dead. No. No, didn't believe this. This was the first time I saw my daddy cry. He never dared to cry. So he thought he is a man, but he finally cried. No, it was the first reaction. My mom sat there, held her head. That was one thing I remember.
My mother always blamed herself for what happened, and of course her parents blamed themselves for what happened, and everyone kind of drifted apart for a while.
It was really hard to understand, on the one hand mentally, on the other hand emotionally, and somehow it still feels like that.
After our Easter holidays, when we went back to school, a few days later, there was an announcement from our principal through the loudspeaker, and he told us that that Inga didn't came back from her Easter holidays. We thought maybe she missed her ferry, or she missed the train, or maybe everything would turn out well. Then in our yearbook, there we found the memory of her that she really got murdered. And we were also young, and we all would love to go abroad and have our adventures and see other countries, and that all made it so terrifying.
Detectives say there is evidence of a genetic nature to connect a man with Inga Maria. The evidence is more commonly understood as a genetic fingerprint, technically known as DNA profiling. A police spokesman said this was a significant development, which could eventually lead to the identity of the person who was in the company of Inga Maria in or around the time she was murdered.
At this point, the police had the partial DNA profile. It could be ascertained that it was the DNA of a man. However, forensic science had not yet developed in order to give the police any further understanding of who the DNA belonged to.
We were all jam-packed in this tiny little room, and I felt sick to the stomach, I must say, when these two lovely people who didn't speak a word of English, didn't understand what was going on. They really looked bewildered to me, and they'd actually just come from the scene, so they must have been shell-shocked.
Bitte nicht, aber ich fühle mich verbunden mit den Müttern, die auch ihre Kinder verloren haben, eventuell durch Terrorismus.
One of the first things that Inga Hauser, the mother, said, despite her grief and being in the centre of this media attention, she actually sympathised with mothers in Northern Ireland who had lost children in the Troubles. I thought, where do you find that sort of compassion?
Es ist unglaublich, also Inga Maria hat von uns aus fast keine Nachteile gehabt.
She spoke lovingly about Inga, that she was a lovely girl with no problems, that she was a very compassionate girl who had a feeling and an empathy for those on the fringes of society. Her father describes it as an absolutely miserable feeling that just never went away, and You know, that's the prevailing feeling, that someone's daughter or sister has come here, wide-eyed tourist, her first Easter adventure, and she ends up in a remote clearing in a forest, battered to death and sexually assaulted. It was just absolutely horrific crime.
That letter there, can we get that off this afternoon?
Inga Maria's name was always in the background in our house. Dad was, to some level, always fighting that campaign for justice.
My interest in this intensified on the 10th anniversary when I read in the local papers that Inga Maria's parents wouldn't be coming back anymore. That coincided with my election to the Northern Ireland Assembly. And so from then on, I made sure that I would constantly write to the police and ask, particularly at the anniversary, and support the appeals for people to come forward so that justice might be done.
He was so proud of where he came from. And our little corner of the world it's so well known for hospitality, for being a warm place. I think it mortified him that this young girl visited here and her trip ended in such a brutal and tragic way.
Determining the time and indeed the date of death is one of the most difficult and problematical areas of forensic medicine. We have to put in a lot of caveats because simply it is a very imprecise science. There are things that we can use, and in particular, the development of rigor mortis, which is the stiffening of the muscles that occur after death. Under normal, and I say normal environmental conditions, rigor mortis is usually fully established in the body in about 12 hours. So the body is pretty stiff and all the muscle groups are pretty stiff at that time. And rigor mortis will remain for a period of time, usually for about 36 to 48 hours. The problem in this particular case was that there was still rigor mortis present in Inga Maria Hauser's body.
These findings would tend to suggest that under ordinary environmental conditions, she had probably been dead for about 3 days prior to her body being discovered.
We are now asking people between the dates of the 6th of April and the 20th of April, are they aware of anyone, a friend, a relative, someone they work with, who perhaps was acting strangely at that time? I don't believe that someone who would be in the company of a young female for 14 days cannot have been seen during that period of time, and whose absence would not be noted as well during that particular time.
My initial assessment that she had been dead for only a few days was based on the fact that there was still rigor mortis present in the body. This is what we see normally under ordinary environmental conditions. The problem in this particular case was very peculiar in environmental conditions that may very well have affected the onset and the development of rigor mortis in this case.
The significant new development in 2006 was the PSNI had conducted a further environmental impact report which came to the conclusion that Inga had died not 14 days after her arrival in Northern Ireland, but most likely the night that she arrived. She was murdered and she was dumped in Ballypatrick Forest on that same day.
A huge amount of time was wasted in trying to establish Inga's movements during a period of time when Inga was already dead.
Well, it just took us down a completely different route. And all those imponderables, all those questions that we had tried to answer over the years were less relevant to the investigation. And of course, it kind of re-energized the investigation. You know, there was a refocus on looking at April 6th, on the night of April 6th, and did she meet her murderer or murderers on that boat, or shortly after she disembarked from the boat? It was another building block, I think, on the investigation, and a new way of looking at trying to find who was responsible.
The advent of DNA technology and the advances in forensic science over the years led to the discovery of the first full DNA sample in Inga's case. It was male DNA that matched the original partial DNA sample that had been located back in 1988. This breakthrough gave the case a new impetus in terms of providing a key forensic link that could now be matched against DNA databases around the world.
In the largest DNA screening process in the UK, detectives say they've had more than 2,000 samples checked out. They reveal that new strands of work on a DNA profile obtained from the crime scene are being carried out. The DNA profile belongs to a man who has not been identified.
Well over 2,000 men were swabbed for DNA, and it failed to provide a breakthrough in the case.
We know that Inga's body does contain DNA that belongs to a male. Despite all the investigative work that's been undertaken so far, we haven't been able to identify who that DNA belongs to, and that's been a primary line of inquiry for us.
Police have now revealed they believe a small number of people could have vital information. The focus of their investigation is in an area east of Ballymoney, taking in Armoy, Lochgiel and Clough-Mills. In 1988, the community here suspected a man who had scratches on his face of involvement in the murder.
That man has never been positively identified, and whilst this isn't important, that is an important person to identify. I think there were other people talked about, there were other suspicions voiced, and I think voiced in quite an animated fashion among certain circles within that community.
The police say they are tantalisingly close to making significant progress, but they just need the remaining pieces of the jigsaw.
The police have advised the family that the person that they believe murdered Inga Maria Hauser had been on the ferry that night. He drove an articulated lorry. There was a sighting of a young woman boarding the passenger side of an articulated lorry. He did not return home that night, and he accepted that. This suspect was seen in the locality with scratches on his face in the aftermath of the murder. There was content which he disputed knowledge of that was found on his computer, which they believe linked him to the sexual motive in this case.
One of Dad's greatest frustrations was that he and many others had a very clear idea of who they believed carried out the murder. He believed that there were many in the community who have information, but that information hasn't been forthcoming.
My belief is that the answers lie very, very close to a very small number of individuals. But that small number of individuals is incredibly difficult to unlock, particularly if they remain loyal to the individuals whom they may be trying to protect. And it's that work that we've been trying to do over the last number of years to unlock what may be that final piece of evidence that enables us to bring this case at last before the criminal courts.
Really, for me, it was around 2017 when I started to take more of a in-depth interest into Inga Maria's case. I was aware of it through police appeals, so I myself went in and tried to speak to a few people in the community. And the first thing that jumped out at me really was that there was this apprehension that people did not want to talk out and that there was silence. It was clear to me that there was people in this area that knew who murdered Inga. And I thought the best thing to do was to take a wee bit of time and then approach the suspect. It was just before the 30th anniversary of Inga Maria's murder, and myself and a colleague went to his countryside home and we spoke to him. I went up, I knocked on the door, and it was a chilling encounter. And I don't say that lightly, but what really took me back that day was the manner in which this man spoke to me. He leaned up against the wall and he just looked at me dead in the eyes. He showed no emotion. He just looked at me and he said that he had nothing to do with her murder and that he'd help police and would I leave. I've never spoken to somebody on their doorstep who has reacted in that calm and measured way with the allegations that I was putting to him. And I came away feeling that I've spoken to someone who has the key to unlock this case.
We've gathered here today on the 30th anniversary of Inga Maria Hauser. We of course support the appeal by the police for those people who may know something about her murder to come forward.
This is an appeal to the public for help in relation to the murder of Inga Maria Hauser. And I still believe that there are people out in the community who have information who will help us resolve the Inga Maria Hauser case, a case actually which we believe that we are still very close to solving.
Just because she was murdered further away from home, and also because this whole case has so many mysterious things and questions around it, it's still there. It can't come to an end.
Genau.
Hallo.
Hi, Christoph, come on. Come on. Nice to meet you, Christoph.
Out of the blue, there are things that are popping up. that might be connected to Inga. And you always have this, on the one hand, this feeling of mystery and open questions around it. And on the other hand, this connection to the special personality of Inga. And of course, always thinking of what would have been her further way through life and what would have been possible for her.
Da war sie aber noch kleiner. Warte mal, wo ist sie? Da ist sie.
Her killer or her killers, they have to be brought to justice. It is important. It is not only important for her parents. I know, they are dead, but her sister, her nephew, and a lot of her friends are alive. And I'm sure they know who were the murderers. They know who was the murderer and who shields him.
Can you picture Inga here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Inga was always friendly, was always kindly, was always. She was such a shiny person.
Yeah, open and sparkling.
And yes, she's always laughing, always. She was so open-minded, and she was the one, in my opinion, who hold our company together.
Yeah.
Last month, this commemorative stone was placed near the spot where Inga Maria Hauser's body was found in Ballypatrick Forest. It marked 30 years since her murder. This morning, the police arrested 2 men in connection with her killing. The suspects are now being questioned by detectives.
I am not convinced that the early stages of the police investigation were conducted with the full rigour that would be necessary to bring a suspect before a court. Despite being 32 years on, the family felt that they were no further forward. Appeal after appeal for information brought them no closer to truth and answers in this case.
It was a distressing meeting for the family of Inga Maria Hauser to learn by video call that neither the man suspected of killing her or the woman suspected of withholding information is to be prosecuted.
I sat with Friederike when she was told that there would not be any prosecution of who the police believe is the chief murder suspect in Inga Maria's case. Coupled with that disappointment, Friederike was told on that day that a key forensic crime scene exhibit in this case was destroyed by the police. Inga's underwear were destroyed for reasons due to dampness and the fact that this was a health hazard for the PSNI. To find that underwear were destroyed in a case that the police describe as a sexually motivated murder, I find utterly shocking.
For Dad, it was beyond belief that key exhibits were destroyed. He pushed hard for an explanation. He never got a satisfactory one. There was huge anger when he learnt that.
Some of the items that had been seized became a health hazard, and they were therefore disposed of as being health hazards. But it's important that I tell you that any evidence that was able to be retrieved from those items in terms of trace DNA, fibres or hairs or anything else that may have been able to identify who was involved in Inga's murder was already secured before any of those items were disposed of. I fully understand how the family and the solicitor may well feel about items having been disposed of, but I need to come back to my earlier point, and that is that the trace evidence that we hope might exist was already well secured even before we got to that point.
I have huge concerns about delay. I have huge concerns about communication between the police and the Hauser family. When I received the bundle of correspondence from the PSNI to the Hauser family, I found between one letter and the next a period of 10 years. I don't think anyone could say that it's satisfactory that there's a 10-year gap between correspondence with a grieving family in a murder investigation.
I don't think we can now ignore the fact that the case was not investigated thoroughly and appropriately. So I do think there is an explanation owed to the family about the failure of investigation and the failure of working in their best interests.
My understanding in this case is that discussions had taken place with Inga's family, and there was an agreement that there would be no need for contact with the family unless there was a significant development. But if Inga's family or the solicitor believe that we've fallen short in terms of how we've dealt with the family, then from a PSNI perspective, I can only apologise. The scale of the investigation at the time would have been very significant. All of the things that I would have expected to have been done were done. But it's also important to state that the investigation was of its time. It was of the period of 1988, and certainly the standards of investigation and the style of investigation will have significantly moved on since that period.
I have travelled to Munich to finally meet the Hauser family in person. I have come to meet Friederike for the very first time. Friederike wants and deserves to know why and how her sister was so callously murdered. She has instructed me to seek an inquest, and that's what I'm here to discuss with her. When I met with Friederike in Munich, the pain and suffering and trauma that she has carried these 33 years was palpable in that room. We'll be able to establish what the police did. I promised her that this case will not go cold again. We have lodged an application with the coroner's office for an inquest. This case will be analysed. Every shred of evidence will be looked at in a public forum, and that will be the first opportunity that the Hauser family have to have an open hearing on the evidence in Inga Maria Hauser's murder. I'm really very delighted to have received it because
if there is going to be an inquest, I think that the PSNI need to be honest with the family. They need to say if they've exhausted all of their evidential leads, if this investigation has hit a brick wall, if it can go no further, and if it has, then hand the files over to the coroner and let them have an inquest, and let's have some disclosure about what exactly they knew back at the time when Inga was murdered and what they know now.
It is absolutely crucial that the family's lawyers see every element of the police investigation so far. Cases like this should not leave families in the dark when it comes down to the evidence that is known and held by the state.
Dad had been unwell for some time. He actually went downhill very, very quickly. We had hardly any time we didn't have enough time to get our heads around it. His physical decline was really rapid. I couldn't let this sit. This campaign has been in the background for most of my memory, to be honest. I plan with as much vigour to throw my weight behind this campaign. I already feel like part of the team, and I won't be giving up.
I refuse to believe that this is the end. There is such a groundswell of compassion and interest in seeing her killer and those who assisted him being made to atone for their barbaric actions on the night of April 6th, 1988.
Many of the problems we had was kind of caused by that incident with Inga. My mother, she never recovered, I think. Bringing this case to a satisfying conclusion would lift that curse for her, I think. And it would kind of help her move on, finally, from her mental state she's been in all her life. It's kind of sad coming here, of course. My mother, I think she never visited this grave after she saw it the first time. It's a little too painful for her to come here. So, yeah, I'm the only one who comes here now.
Please, help me solve this case. Save my sister's soul. She wants to rest in peace, no? Now she's a ghost. She's appearing in my dreams. No? She appears everywhere. No? It's a living nightmare I'm going through. Please help me, folks, no? Everyone who knows anything, no? Every person in the world, no?
We never give up the hope that those individuals who may have the evidence that they've carried for such a long time may one day see the need for them to come and talk to the police about what they know. From our perspective, this case is by no means closed. We believe that we're very close to unlocking this case in totality, and we believe that we're very close to bringing offenders to justice for their involvement in the murder of Inga Maria Hauser.
There's a saying, we are only dead if nobody remembers us. And as long as she gets remembered, there's still something of her left in the world.